Hey everyone, Howie Fisher with Fisher's Flies. Thanks for checking in. Today I am tying up the famous purple haze dry fly, which has become a classic dry fly in general, but especially effective for brook trout. I'm using the Regal hook jaws, so I am going to be burying the hook point in the jaws themselves on this ultimate dry fly hook from Fulling Mill, and I'm using a size 14 for the hook. And for the thread, I'm using UTC 70 denier in purple. And I'm going to go ahead and get started with my thread pretty much right behind the hook eye. I am going to leave a little bit of a gap to allow for finishing the fly, but you don't have to leave a ton, as we're going to finish around the parachute post on this one. The tail here, I'm using CDL or Coq de Leon in dark Pardo, but any darker color should do just fine. I'm going to go ahead and select about a dozen fibers or so for this size fly, and we want to try and pull those off the stem with the tips aligned. But if you can't get it that way, it's not the end of the world. You can slightly readjust them if needed. I'm going to go ahead and measure this tail about the length of the hook shank, and I like to go ahead and take a couple wraps and then adjust if needed. Once I've done that, I'm going to bring my thread back to about the bend of the hook while pulling my fibers up, and then bring my thread back to about the hook eye. And the goal here is to create an even body, not necessarily a taper. You're going to do that with the dubbing, but an even body is going to make finishing this fly in general just a little bit easier. And then I'm using ultra dry yarn from Fulling Mill in white for the parachute post. And I'm going to go ahead and tie this down at the midpoint of this about 1.5 inch section that I've made, and with about 3 or 4 wraps, and then I'm going to bring my thread in front of and behind that. And really all I'm doing here is trying to just get these fibers to stick straight up. And then I'm going to go ahead and start taking wraps around the base of this. And at this point, you're working to try and get the parachute post to start forming. And I'm having a little bit of trouble here with the camera in the way. But once I get that done, I like to go ahead and take a couple wraps. And really the best thing to do here is to take the amount of wraps needed. You don't want to take too many because you don't want to build up unnecessary bulk. But if you have a good solid base, then it'll make wrapping that the thread up the parachute post a little bit easier. So once I've got a good base, I'm going to go ahead and bring my thread back to the tail, and I'm going to grab my tactical dry fly dubbing in royal purple from Fulling Mill. This is a pre-treated dubbing from Fulling Mill. It's a super fine dubbing. It really is a solid, very excellent dry fly dubbing. Makes a nice little thin noodle, as you can see here. And I'm just going to go ahead and start wrapping my dubbing up to right behind the parachute post and creating a little bit of a taper. And I'm going to go ahead and redo this because I brought it too far forward actually. And if you need to adjust anything, now's the time to do that, because it's easier to do it now than when you are done with the fly. So I'm going to bring my thread to right behind the hook eye, and then I'm going to go ahead and grab my hackle, which here is just a standard grizzly hackle. I'm going to go ahead and tie this in on the parallel or the horizontal part of the hook shank. And then I'm going to start wrapping my way up. And I'm going to take my thread a couple wraps past the original base that I had made. So the way that I personally like to tie my parachute post is I'll create a base, and then I'll come back and go a little bit further up to where I want it later on. I'm going to go ahead and grab my tactical micro flash dubbing in UV violet. This is going to be the thorax of the fly, or the head of the fly. And this is also going to add some flash to this. And you want to create a nice little dubbing loop. You don't want to overdo it here. It is easy to overdo it, but it's also easy to underdo it. So it might take some practice, but I'm going to go ahead and get started right behind the eye and build up just a bulbous little thorax here and take cross wraps all around. Make sure I've got all of the blank spots. Then I'm going to turn my hook eye down and start wrapping my hackle down the base of the parachute post that I've made. This is arguably the most difficult part of the fly, which is why it's nice to be able to move your hook in the hook jaws like this. Once I take about 4 wraps down, I'm going to go ahead and secure my hackle around the base of the post. And then I'm going to go ahead and whip finish around the base of the post, which is another reason why I like using a pre-cut piece of parachute post. I'm going to go ahead and snip my thread, snip off my excess feather, making sure not to snip too many fibers off, or really try and snip none off if possible. Then I'm going to reorient my fly in the vise. I'm going to go ahead and trim my parachute posts here. And then lastly, I'm going to take some Solarez bone dry and hit the base of that parachute post in those thread wraps to make sure that those don't come undone and they're not going anywhere. And once I've hit it with some UV light, this fly is ready to fish and catch some great fish. But there you have it, the one and only Purple Haze parachute Adams. Thanks for checking in.